Okay, so today what we're going to do is look at activity 7.4, which is assembly models. And for this, we're going to start out with the jack lift. And the jack lift, as you can see, only has 3 parts. So we'll just jump right into it. It says to create a new assembly file titled jack lift and save it to your student folder. So I'll come over to Inventor and click on New Assembly. And brings up the assembly menu. And now I'm ready to go. So I'll go to Save As. And I will call it Jack Lift. And then we'll start bringing in parts. Now, the thing that you need to understand with all assemblies is that at least one part has to be grounded. So if I look at my next instruction, it says place the base component into the assembly. The component will be grounded and therefore locked in space. So I'm going to come over here to place, and I'm going to find my jack lift assembly, which for me is in my student inventor files and jack lift inventor files. So I will bring in the base. Now, the base is pretty big, and you can bring in as many of these as you want, but for this we only need one. So I'm going to bring it in, and there it is, and then hit the escape button because I only want one of them. Now that's in a good position right now. I'll zoom out a little bit, and so we want to ground it. So I'm going to highlight the base part, and I'm going to right click and find grounded and check that. So now my degrees of freedom are limited. Remember, you have 6 degrees of freedom. So what that means is that you have movement in the X, Y, and Z direction, but you also have rotation in the X, Y, and Z direction. So we'll get into degrees of freedom a little bit later. All right, step 3 says apply a tangent constraint to the neck of the wedge screw component, selection shown in blue, and one of the vertical walls of the open slot on the base component, selection shown in green. So let's go grab the wedge screw, and I'll bring that in. And again, we only need one of those. So bring that in, and if you notice, I can freely move this in any direction. And then if I click on free rotate, I can freely rotate this in any direction. So right now it has all 6 degrees of freedom. So I'm going to kind of line that up there. And then I'm going to use constraints. So I go over here to constrain. Okay. And this controls the position and behavior of assembly components. So I click on this and I scroll over for type. And I want tangent, because tangent shows you that you get a flat surface connected to a circular surface. So I click on tangent, and I want that next to each other. So I find the neck of the wedge screw, which is right there, and then I will find the open slot component, which is right there, and I will hit OK. So now if you notice, this still kind of slides around. That's okay. It's always going to take more than one constraint to get things locked into place. Okay. Then it says apply a mate constraint to the back face of the base and the circular face of the underside of the wedge screw's head. So I'm going to pull this out just a little bit so we can have some more room to see. Now, part of the key to assembly is rotating your view cube around. So I'm going to rotate my view cube around so I can see the back of the base. And I'm going to grab my mate constraint. Okay, mate links two opposing faces together. So I'm going to hit the back face of the base, and then it says to hit the underside of the circular part of the wedge. And if I scroll over, I start getting a bunch of different stuff. So make sure that you get what you want there, which is right there. Okay, it's real subtle. I'm going to hit apply, and you notice that the wedge screw disappears, but I can still move this around, but now it only moves up and down, but it also rotates, which is fine. So I'm going to leave that kind of where it is. Okay, next step says apply a mate constraint to the bottom face of the wedge component and the top angled face of the base component. So now I need to bring in my wedge. So I'll go back to place, grab the wedge, hit open, and there it is. And I'll hit escape because I only want one of them. And again, it says to free rotate so I can get it in the proper position. That looks pretty good there. I can see both faces. So I'm okay there. So now I'm going to do a mate. So I mate this bottom face of the wedge with the top face of the base. Okay, and notice how it doesn't quite slide into place yet. But again, everything is going to take more than one constraint to get things where you want it to go. Okay, step 6, apply a mate constraint between the center axis of the threaded hole in the wedge component and the center axis of the wedge screw component. All right, so back to mate, and this time I'm going to move my view cube around a little bit so I can see better. And I want this with the green dot for the wedge base. Actually, sorry, I want the, yeah, there. And then I want the axis. Okay, make sure it says axis, and then I'm going to hit OK. All right, so you notice now that it's kind of where it needs to be, but not quite yet. So we're going to move this into position there. Okay. Lastly, it says apply a flush constraint to the front faces of the wedge component and the front face of the base component. So I'm going to grab this constraint, and here's my front face of the wedge. There's my front face of the base. Now I want to make sure that I'm on flush because this will lock in two faces in the same direction. So I do that, and I hit OK. And then it says to perform an interference analysis. Okay, notice how the screw still turns. That's great. Between the wedge and wedge screw component. So we'll go over to inspect and click on analyze interference. This says it analyzes the selected components for interference. So I'm going to click on this, define set 1, that's the wedge, and define set 2. Now that is the wedge screw. I hit OK. Okay, it says a total of 1 interference is detected with a total volume of 0.2 inches cubed. Okay, so that's good. Now it says revert to wireframe screen mode and perform a screen grab or a snip of the image. So I'm going to go to view and click on visual style, and I want to select wireframe. Okay, and there I get just an outline view. So go ahead and snip that, snip your browser, and then the jack lift assembly is complete.